It's one of those afternoons that just leaves a bitter taste, the kind that lingers longer than it should. Celtic walked into Tannadice knowing exactly what was at stake, fully aware that every single point matters at this stage of the season, and yet what unfolded on that pitch felt miles away from a team chasing a title. Another defeat in Dundee, the third one there this campaign, and suddenly the table looks a whole lot more uncomfortable than it did just a week ago. The gap has opened up at precisely the wrong moment. Sitting 5 points behind Hearts and 2 adrift of Rangers with only 7 matches remaining is not where anyone associated with Celtic expected to be. There was a sense, not long ago, that momentum might finally be building, especially after a strong result the previous weekend. But just as quickly as that optimism crept in, it's been knocked right back out again with a performance that lacked intensity, urgency, and most concerning of all, belief. From the very beginning, there was something slightly off. The team selection sparked a bit of intrigue, especially with key players returning and a reshuffle up front that hinted at a more direct approach. Given the conditions, it made sense on paper. The pitch wasn't exactly ideal for intricate play, and in matches like these, sometimes pace and physicality give you a better chance than flair. But even with that adjustment, Celtic never truly imposed themselves on the game. What stood out more than anything was the lack of aggression. Not just in the big moments, but in the small duels, the 50-50 balls, the second phases that often define matches played on difficult surfaces. Time and time again, Celtic players seemed second to react, second to challenge, and second to believe they could take control. It wasn't just a technical issue or a tactical misstep, it felt deeper than that. Almost like the edge you need in these environments simply wasn't there. To be fair, the first half wasn't entirely without promise. There were spells where Celtic controlled possession and managed to push into decent areas. A couple of chances came and went, the kind you look back on later and realize they might have changed the entire trajectory of the match. There was even a feeling, quietly building, that this could turn into one of those scrappy, hard-fought wins where quality isn't at its peak, but the result still goes your way. But football rarely rewards hesitation, and the second half told a completely different story. Conceding early after the break shifted the tone instantly, and instead of responding with urgency, Celtic seemed to shrink under the pressure. When the second goal followed not long after, the reaction everyone expected simply never arrived. There was no sustained push, no real sense of desperation, and that's what made it all the more alarming. You expect a team chasing the title, especially one with Celtic's history and expectations, to throw everything forward in moments like that. Even if the quality isn't there, the intent has to be undeniable. But what unfolded instead was a side that looked disjointed, unsure, and at times completely out of ideas. Dundee United, on the other hand, looked far more likely to extend their lead than concede it. There was a passage of play in that second half that summed it all up. A breakdown in communication, a loose touch, and suddenly the ball is being cleared in panic rather than purpose. It wasn't just a mistake. It was symbolic of a team that had lost its composure entirely. The structure disappeared, the confidence drained, and what remained was a group of players struggling to regain any kind of control. Individually, there were performances that raised serious questions, but it would be unfair to isolate the blame on just one or two. The issues felt collective. Decision-making in the final third was poor, movement off the ball lacked conviction, and even the basics, like winning aerial duels or holding possession under pressure, seemed like a challenge. When so many elements fall short at once, it becomes almost impossible to recover within the 90 minutes. And then there's the bigger picture, because this isn't an isolated incident. Away from home, these kinds of performances have become a recurring theme. The inability to consistently create chances, to dictate games in difficult conditions, and to find solutions when things aren't going smoothly has cost Celtic time and time again this season. It's not just about one bad day. It's about a pattern that's emerged at the worst possible stage. What makes it even more frustrating is that this squad has shown, on multiple occasions, that it can grind out results even when performances aren't convincing. There have been late winners, moments of resilience, flashes of determination that suggested there was enough character to stay in the fight. But at Tannadice, it felt like that resilience simply vanished. The pressure of the title race is undeniable, and maybe that played a part. Maybe the weight of expectation, combined with the conditions and recent inconsistencies, created a scenario where confidence just couldn't take hold. But at this level, those are challenges you have to overcome, not reasons to fall short. The best teams adapt, they dig in, they find a way, even when everything seems to be going against them. Instead, what we saw was a team that never truly adapted. The pitch conditions, while far from perfect, were the same for both sides. Dundee United managed to play with purpose, to look dangerous, and to execute their plan effectively. Celtic, by contrast, looked like they were waiting for the game to settle into something more comfortable, something more familiar, and by the time they realized it wouldn't, it was already too late. There's also a growing sense that the squad itself might be part of the issue. With so many changes throughout the season, particularly with players coming in on short-term deals, it raises questions about cohesion and commitment. When you're in a title race, every player needs to feel fully invested, fully connected to the objective. And at times, it doesn't quite look like that's the case here. You can't ignore the effort factor either. Even when quality drops, effort should never be negotiable. Running, pressing, competing for every ball, these are the fundamentals that keep you in games. And on this occasion, too many moments passed where Celtic simply didn't do enough in those areas. That's what frustrates supporters the most, because those are things that don't depend on tactics or conditions, they come down to mindset. As the final whistle approached, the atmosphere told its own story. What started with encouragement and belief gradually turned into frustration and disbelief. Not just because of the result, but because of how it happened. There's a difference between being beaten and being outworked, and this felt far closer to the latter. Now, with the margin for error completely gone, every remaining fixture becomes a must-win. But more than that, there needs to be a visible shift in attitude, in approach, and in execution. Because if this performance is anything to go by, the challenge ahead is far greater than just closing a points gap. As the players made their way off the pitch, there was a strange feeling in the air, almost like the magnitude of the result hadn't fully sunk in. You could see the frustration, of course, but there wasn't that raw sense of urgency or desperation that you would expect after a defeat of this scale. And that's what makes this moment so difficult to process, because this wasn't just another loss. This was one that could very well define how the rest of the season unfolds. When you look at the body language, it didn't scream a team that knows it's running out of time. It felt more like a group that believes there are still plenty of opportunities ahead, when in reality, the margin for error has completely disappeared. At this stage, every dropped point carries enormous weight, and this one, given the circumstances, feels particularly damaging. Especially when you factor in how the results around them had opened a door just days earlier. That's what makes it even harder to accept. There was a genuine chance to build momentum, to apply pressure, and to shift the narrative heading into the final stretch. Instead, it swung back the other way, and now Celtic find themselves chasing again, relying not only on their own performances, but also on slip-ups from their rivals. It's no longer fully in their hands, and that's a dangerous place to be. There's also the question of mentality, because in games like this, when conditions are tough and the rhythm isn't there, mentality often becomes the deciding factor. It's about who wants it more, who's willing to dig deeper, who refuses to let the game drift away. And unfortunately, Celtic didn't look like the side willing to do that. Too many moments passed where a stronger reaction was needed, and it simply never came. You could point to tactical decisions, and there's always going to be debate around those, especially when the outcome is negative. Certain substitutions raised eyebrows, particularly in how they impacted the structure of the team. Shifting players out of their natural positions in a game that already lacked stability only seemed to add to the confusion. And when you're chasing the game, clarity becomes even more important, not less. At the same time, it's not as simple as placing everything at the manager's door. Over the course of the season, there have been plenty of signs that this squad has limitations. There's a lack of consistency, a lack of cohesion at times, and perhaps most worrying, a lack of reliability in key moments. You can set a team up as best as possible, but once they cross that line, it comes down to the players to execute, and too often, that execution has fallen short. The recruitment side of things also comes into focus, especially when you consider how important the January window was supposed to be. That was the opportunity to strengthen, to address weaknesses, and to bring in players who could make an immediate impact. But looking at how things have unfolded, it's hard to argue that those additions have truly shifted the balance. There have been flashes here and there, individual moments that hinted at potential, but nothing sustained enough to change the overall trajectory. Some players have struggled to find rhythm, others haven't been given enough opportunities to settle, and a few have simply failed to adapt to the demands of the league. When you're trying to chase down a title, that kind of uncertainty can be costly. It also raises a deeper question about the nature of short-term signings. When players arrive without a long-term stake in the club, it can sometimes affect the collective mindset, even if only slightly. It's not necessarily about effort in a visible sense, but more about that extra edge, that emotional investment that drives teams through difficult moments. And right now, that edge doesn't always seem present. There are, of course, exceptions. Players who have embraced the challenge, who have shown the desire to fight for every point, and who understand what it means to represent a club of this magnitude. But football isn't carried by individuals alone. It requires a unified approach, a shared intensity, and that's where things have felt a bit fragmented. Going back to the match itself, what stands out most is how quickly belief seemed to fade once things started going wrong. Conceding the first goal is always a test of character, but it's the response that defines you. Instead of rising to that challenge, Celtic appeared to retreat into themselves, and that allowed the game to slip further and further out of reach. Even the changes made during the game didn't inject the spark that was needed. When fresh legs come on, especially in a losing position, you expect energy, urgency, and a willingness to take risks. But instead, it felt disjointed, like the pieces didn't quite fit together. The tempo didn't increase, the intensity didn't rise, and the opposition remained comfortable. That's perhaps the most worrying aspect of all, how comfortable Dundee United looked in seeing the game out. They weren't under constant pressure, they weren't forced into desperate defending, and that speaks volumes about how little threat Celtic managed to generate when it mattered most. For a team with attacking ambitions, that's a serious concern. And now, everything shifts to what comes next. The fixtures ahead don't get any easier, and the expectations certainly don't lessen. If anything, the pressure only intensifies from here. Every match becomes a test not just of ability, but of character, resilience, and belief. Because if those elements aren't there, no tactical tweak or personnel change is going to be enough. There's still time, mathematically at least, but it requires something close to perfection from this point on. Not just in results, but in performances. There needs to be a clear identity, a sense of purpose, and most importantly, a reaction that shows this defeat hasn't broken the spirit of the squad. Supporters will continue to back the team, that much is certain, but they'll also demand a response. Not in words, not in post-match reflections, but on the pitch, where it truly matters. Because moments like this don't just test a season, they test the foundations of a team and what it stands for when everything is on the line. Before we proceed, subscribe to our channel and enable notifications to receive all exclusive news about Celtic FC. Don't miss any details about your favorite team. It's extremely important for Celtic FC fans. The rumour mill is in full swing across Scottish football, with whispers growing louder that Elijah just could be on the brink of a notable switch from Motherwell FC to the reigning giants of Glasgow, Celtic FC. Sources close to the situation suggest that discussions have progressed quietly, with the player understood to be keen on embracing a step up in both expectation and opportunity. Just, who has impressed in flashes with his pace and direct attacking style, is believed to have caught the eye of Celtic's recruitment team over recent months. While nothing official has been confirmed, there is a growing sense that the move has gathered real momentum behind the scenes. Those familiar with the negotiations hint that personal terms may not be a significant obstacle, with the allure of European nights and a larger stage proving difficult to resist. From Motherwell's perspective, the potential departure would represent both a sporting loss and a financial opportunity. The club have shown a willingness in the past to develop and move on talent at the right moment, and there is quiet acceptance that interest at this level is difficult to turn away. Still, supporters may feel a sense of what might have been if just development had continued uninterrupted in claret and amber. For Celtic, the move would align with a strategy of adding youthful energy and depth to an already formidable squad. There is belief within the club that Just's attributes could be refined further in a more dominant side, where his ability to stretch defenses might become a valuable asset. As ever with such speculation, nothing is certain until the ink is dry. Yet the noise surrounding this potential transfer refuses to fade, and where there is sustained smoke in Scottish football, there is often fire waiting to break through. Hello, fan. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, as it means a lot to Celtic FC. Also, share your opinion about the news in the comments below. See you in the next video.